29 Acharei Mot After the death. Acharei Mot After the death. Parashah 29 Acharei Mot After the death. Torah Vayikra, Leviticus, 16:1-18:30. Haftarah Yechezk'el, Ezekiel, 22:1-19. Pirit Hadashah Romans 3:19-28. 9:30-10:13. 1 Corinthians 5:1-13 with 2 Corinthians 2:1-11. Galatians 3:10-14. Messianic Jews, Hebrews, 7:23-10:25. Torah Vayikra, Leviticus, 16:1-18:30. 16:1 Adonai spoke with Moshe after the death of Aaron's two sons, when they tried to sacrifice before Adonai and died. Adonai said to Moshe, "Tell your brother Aaron not to come at just any time into the holy place beyond the curtain, in front of the ark cover which is on the ark, so that he will not die, because I appear in the cloud over the ark cover." Here is how Aaron is to enter the holy place with a young bull as a sin offering and a ram as a burnt offering. He is to put on the holy linen tunic, have the linen shorts next to his bare flesh, have the linen sash wrapped around him, and be wearing the linen turban. They are the holy garments. He is to bathe his body in water and put them on. He is to take from the community of the people of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to present the bull for the sin offering which is for himself and make atonement for himself and his household. He is to take the 2 goats and place them before Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then Aaron is to cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for Adonai and the other for Ezekiel. Aaron is to present the goat whose lot fell to Adonai and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat whose lot fell to Ezekiel is to be presented alive to Adonai to be used for making atonement over it by sending it away into the desert for Ezekiel. Aaron is to present the bull of the sin offering for himself. He will make atonement for himself and his household. He is to slaughter the bull of the sin offering which is for himself. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before Adonai and, with his hands full of ground, fragrant incense, bring it inside the curtain. He is to put the incense on the fire before Adonai, so that the cloud from the incense will cover the ark cover which is over the testimony, in order that he not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood and sprinkle it with his finger on the ark cover toward the east, and in front of the ark cover he is to sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Next, he is to slaughter the goat of the sin offering which is for the people, bring its blood inside the curtain and do with its blood as he did with the bull's blood, sprinkling it on the ark cover and in front of the ark cover. He will make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleannesses of the people of Israel and because of their transgressions, all their sins. And he is to do the same for the tent of meeting which is there with them right in the middle of their uncleannesses. No one is to be present in the tent of meeting from the time he enters the holy place to make atonement until the time he comes out, having made atonement for himself, for his household and for the entire community of Israel. Then he is to go out to the altar that is before Adonai and make atonement for it. He is to take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood and put it on all the horns of the altar. He is to sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times, thus purifying it and setting it apart from the uncleannesses of the people of Israel. When he has finished atoning for the holy place, the tent of meeting and the altar, he is to present the live goat. Aaron is to lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the transgressions, crimes and sins of the people of Israel. He is to put them on the head of the goat and then send it away into the desert with a man appointed for the purpose. The goat will bear all their transgressions away to some isolated place, and he is to let the goat go in the desert. Aaron is to go back into the tent of meeting, where he is to remove the linen garments he put on when he entered the holy place, and he is to leave them there. Then he is to bathe his body in water in a holy place, put on his other clothes, come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, thus making atonement for himself and for the people. He is to make the fat of the sin offering go up in smoke on the altar. The man who let go the goat for Ezekiel is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Afterwards, he may return to the camp. The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, is to be carried outside the camp. There they are to burn up completely their hides, meat and dung. The person burning them is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. Afterwards, he may return to the camp. It is to be a permanent regulation for you that on the 10th day of the 7th month you are to deny yourselves and not do any kind of work, both the citizen and the foreigner living with you. For on this day, atonement will be made for you to purify you. You will be clean before Adonai from all your sins. It is a Shabbat of complete rest for you, and you are to deny yourselves. This is a permanent regulation. The Kohen anointed and consecrated to be Kohen in his father's place will make the atonement. He will put on the linen garments, the holy garments. He will make atonement for the especially holy place, he will make atonement for the tent of meeting and the altar, and he will make atonement for the Kohanim and for all the people of the community. This is a permanent regulation for you, to make atonement for the people of Israel because of all their sins once a year. Moshe did as Adonai had ordered him. 17:1 Adonai said to Moshe, Speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the people of Israel. Tell them that this is what Adonai has ordered when someone from the community of Israel slaughters an ox, lamb or goat inside or outside the camp without bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to Adonai before the tabernacle of Adonai. He is to be charged with blood, he has shed blood, and the person is to be cut off from his people. The reason for this is so that the people of Israel will bring their sacrifices that they sacrifice out in the field, so that they will bring them to Adonai, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen, and sacrifice them as peace offerings to Adonai. The Kohen will splash the blood against the altar of Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting and make the fat go up in smoke as a pleasing aroma for Adonai. No longer will they offer sacrifices to the goat demons, before whom they prostitute themselves. This is a permanent regulation for them through all their generations. Also tell them, when someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you offers a burnt offering or sacrifice without bringing it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to sacrifice it to Adonai, that person is to be cut off from his people. When someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you eats any kind of blood, I will set myself against that person who eats blood and cut him off from his people. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it you on the altar to make atonement for yourselves, for it is the blood that makes atonement because of the life. This is why I told the people of Israel, none of you is to eat blood, nor is any foreigner living with you to eat blood. When someone from the community of Israel or one of the foreigners living with you hunts and catches game, whether animal or bird that may be eaten, he is to pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For the life of every creature its blood is its life. Therefore, I said to the people of Israel, you are not to eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is its blood, whoever eats it will be cut off. Anyone eating an animal that dies naturally or is torn to death by wild animals, whether he is a citizen or a foreigner, is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening, then he will be clean, but if he doesn't wash them or bathe his body, he will bear the consequences of his wrongdoing. 18:1 Adonai said to Moshe, Speak to the people of Israel, tell them, I am Adonai your God. You are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Egypt, where you used to live. And you are not to engage in the activities found in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you, nor are you to live by their laws. You are to obey my rulings and laws and live accordingly. I am Adonai your God. You are to observe my laws and rulings. If a person does them, he will have life through them. I am Adonai. None of you is to approach anyone who is a close relative in order to have sexual relations. I am Adonai. You are not to have sexual relations with your father, and you are not to have sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's wife. That is your father's prerogative. You are not to have sexual relations with your sister, the daughter of your father or the daughter of your mother, whether born at home or elsewhere. Do not have sexual relations with them. You are not to have sexual relations with your son's daughter or with your daughter's daughter. Do not have sexual relations with them, because their sexual disgrace will be your own. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's wife's daughter, born to your father, because she is your sister. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your father's sister, because she is your father's close relative. You are not to have sexual relations with your mother's sister, because she is your mother's close relative. You are not to disgrace your father's brother by having sexual relations with his wife, because she is your aunt. You are not to have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law, because she is your son's wife. Do not have sexual relations with her. You are not to have sexual relations with your brother's wife, because this is your brother's prerogative. You are not to have sexual relations with both a woman and her daughter, nor are you to have sexual relations with her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter. They are close relatives of hers, and it would be shameful. You are not to take a woman to be a rival with her sister and have sexual relations with her while her sister is still alive. You are not to approach a woman in order to have sexual relations with her when she is unclean from her time of niddah. You are not to go to bed with your neighbor's wife and thus become unclean with her. You are not to let any of your children be sacrificed to Molech, thereby profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai. You are not to go to bed with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. You are not to have sexual relations with any kind of animal and thus become unclean with it. nor is any woman to present herself to an animal to have sexual relations with it, it is perversion. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, because all the nations which I am expelling ahead of you are defiled with them. The land has become unclean, and this is why I am punishing it. The land itself will vomit out its inhabitants. But you are to keep my laws and rulings and not engage in any of these disgusting practices, neither the citizen nor the foreigner living with you. Matthew 27. For the people of the land have committed all these abominations, and the land is now defiled. If you make the land unclean, it will vomit you out too, just as it is vomiting out the nation that was there before you. For those who engage in any of these disgusting practices, whoever they may be, will be cut off from their people. So keep my charge not to follow any of these abominable customs that others before you have followed and thus defile yourselves by doing them. I am Adonai your God. Haftarah Yechezk'el, Ezekiel 22:1-19, 22:1. The word of Adonai came to me now, human being, are you prepared to judge? Are you prepared to judge the city drenched in blood? Then make her realize how disgusting all her practices are. Say that Adonai Elohim says, city that sheds blood within yourself, thus speeding your own doom, and that makes idols for yourself that defile you. You are guilty because of the blood you have shed. You are defiled by your idols that you have made. You have shortened your days, you have completed your years. Therefore I have made you an object of scorn for the nations and a laughingstock for every country. Those close by and those far off will taunt you, you who have such a defiled reputation and such great disorder. The leaders of Israel in you all use their power in order to shed blood. In you, they make light of fathers and mothers, they oppress foreigners, they wrong orphans and widows. You treat my holy things with contempt, you profane my Shabbats. In you, people gossip to the point of inciting bloodshed. In you are those who go to eat on the mountains. In you, they commit lewd acts. In you, they commit incest. In you, they force themselves on women during their menstrual impurity. In you, one commits an abomination with his neighbor's wife, another commits some lewd act defiling his daughter-in-law. Still another humbles his sister, his own father's daughter. In you, people take bribes to shed blood. You demand and accept interest on loans. In greed you make profits off your neighbors by extorting them, and you have forgotten me, says Adonai Elohim. Therefore, I am clapping my hands together because of your ill-gotten gains and the bloodshed in you. Can your courage last? Can your strength continue during the days when I deal with you? I, Adonai, have spoken it, and I will do it. I will scatter you among the nations and disperse you throughout the countries. Thus I will remove your defilement from you, and you will cause yourselves to be profaned in full view of the nations. Then you will know that I am Adonai. The word of Adonai came to me, human being. The house of Israel has become an alloy of base metals for me. They are all copper, tin, iron and lead mixed together in the crucible, the dross left over from the silver. Therefore Adonai Elohim says this, because you have all become dross, I will collect all of you inside Yerushalayim. Pirit Hadashah. Romans 3:19-28, 9:30-10:13, 1 Corinthians 5:1-13 with 2 Corinthians 2:1-11, Galatians 3:10-14, Messianic Jews, Hebrews 7:23-10-25, Romans 3:19. Moreover, we know that whatever the Torah says, it says to those living within the framework of the Torah, in order that every mouth may be stopped and the whole world be shown to deserve God's adverse judgment. For in his sight no one alive will be considered righteous on the ground of legalistic observance of Torah commands, because what Torah really does is show people how sinful they are. But now, quite apart from Torah, God's way of making people righteous in his sight has been made clear, although the Torah and the prophets give their witness to it as well, and it is a righteousness that comes from God, through the faithfulness of Yeshua the Messiah, to all who continue trusting. For it makes no difference whether one is a Jew or a Gentile, since all have sinned and come short of earning God's praise. By God's grace, without earning it, all are granted the status of being considered righteous before him, through the act redeeming us from our enslavement to sin that was accomplished by the Messiah Yeshua. God put Yeshua forward as the capora for sin through his faithfulness in respect to his bloody sacrificial death. This vindicated God's righteousness, because, in his forbearance, he had passed over, with neither punishment nor remission, the sins people had committed in the past. And it vindicates his righteousness in the present age by showing that he is righteous himself and is also the one who makes people righteous on the ground of Yeshua's faithfulness. So what room is left for boasting? None at all. What kind of Torah excludes it? One that has to do with legalistic observance of rules? No, rather, a Torah that has to do with trusting. Therefore, We hold the view that a person comes to be considered righteous by God on the ground of trusting, which has nothing to do with legalistic observance of Torah commands. Romans 9:30. So, what are we to say? This, that Gentiles, even though they were not striving for righteousness, have obtained righteousness, but it is a righteousness grounded in trusting. However, Israel, even though they kept pursuing a Torah that offers righteousness, did not reach what the Torah offers. Why? Because they did not pursue righteousness as being grounded in trusting, but as if it were grounded in doing legalistic works. They stumbled over the stone that makes people stumble. As the Tanakh puts it, look, I am laying in Zion a stone that will make people stumble, a rock that will trip them up, but he who rests his trust on it will not be humiliated. 10. Brothers, my heart's deepest desire and my prayer to God for Israel is for their salvation, for I can testify to their zeal for God, but it is not based on correct understanding. For, since they are unaware of God's way of making people righteous and instead seek to set up their own, they have not submitted themselves to God's way of making people righteous. For the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. For Moshe writes about the righteousness grounded in the Torah that the person who does these things will attain life through them. Moreover, the righteousness grounded in trusting says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend to heaven, that is, to bring the Messiah down, or, who will descend into Sheol, that is, to bring the Messiah up from the dead. What, then, does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is, the word about trust which we proclaim, namely, that if you acknowledge publicly with your mouth that Yeshua is Lord and trust in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be delivered. For with the heart one goes on trusting and thus continues toward righteousness, while with the mouth one keeps on making public acknowledgement and thus continues toward deliverance. For the passage quoted says that everyone who rests his trust on him will not be humiliated. That means that there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. Adonai is the same for everyone, rich toward everyone who calls on him. Since everyone who calls on the name of Adonai will be delivered. 1 Corinthians 5:1. It is actually being reported that there is sexual sin among you, and it is sexual sin of a kind that is condemned even by pagans. A man is living with his stepmother, and you stay proud? Shouldn't you rather have felt some sadness that would have led you to remove from your company the man who has done this thing? For I myself, even though I am absent physically, am with you spiritually, and I have already judged the man who has done this as if I were present. In the name of the Lord Yeshua, when you are assembled, with me present spiritually in the power of our Lord Yeshua among us, hand over such a person to the adversary for his old nature to be destroyed, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Your boasting is not good. Don't you know the saying, it takes only a little hametz to leaven a whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old hametz, so that you can be a new batch of dough, because in reality you are unleavened. For our Pesach lamb, the Messiah, has been sacrificed. So let us celebrate the Seder not with leftover hametz, the hametz of wickedness and evil, but with the matzah of purity and truth. In my earlier letter I wrote you not to associate with people who engage in sexual immorality. I didn't mean the sexually immoral people outside your community, or the greedy, or the thieves or the idol worshippers, for then you would have to leave the world altogether. No, what I wrote you was not to associate with anyone who is supposedly a brother but who also engages in sexual immorality, is greedy, worships idols, is abusive, gets drunk or steals. With such a person you shouldn't even eat. For what business is it of mine to judge outsiders? Isn't it those who are part of the community that you should be judging? God will judge those who are outside. Just expel the avildo from among yourselves. 2 Corinthians 2:1. So I made up my mind that I would not pay you another painful visit. For if I cause you pain, who is left to make me happy except the people I have pained? Indeed, this is why I wrote as I did, so that when I came, I would not have to be pained by those who ought to be making me happy. For I had enough confidence in all of you to believe that unless I could be happy, none of you could be happy either. I wrote to you with a greatly distressed and anguished heart, and with many tears, not in order to cause you pain, but to get you to realize how very much I love you. Now if someone has been a cause of pain, it is not I whom he has pained, but, in some measure I don't want to overstate it all of you. For such a person the punishment already imposed on him by the majority is sufficient, so that now you should do the opposite: forgive him, encourage him, comfort him. Otherwise such a person might be swallowed up in overwhelming depression, so I urge you to show that you really do love him. The reason I wrote you was to see if you would pass the test, to see if you would fully obey me. Anyone you forgive, I forgive too. For indeed, Whatever I have forgiven, if there has been anything to forgive, has been for your sake in the presence of the Messiah, so that we will not be taken advantage of by the adversary, for we are quite aware of his schemes. Galatians 3:10 For everyone who depends on legalistic observance of Torah commands lives under a curse, since it is written, "Cursed is everyone who does not keep on doing everything written in the scroll of the Torah." Now it is evident that no one comes to be declared righteous by God through legalism, since the person who is righteous will attain life by trusting and being faithful. Furthermore, legalism is not based on trusting and being faithful, but on a misuse of the text that says, anyone who does these things will attain life through them. The Messiah redeemed us from the curse pronounced in the Torah by becoming cursed on our behalf, for the Tanakh says, everyone who hangs from a stake comes under a curse. Yeshua the Messiah did this so that in union with him the Gentiles might receive a blessing announced to Abraham, so that through trusting and being faithful, we might receive what was promised, namely, the Spirit. Hebrews 7:23 Moreover, the present Kohanim are many in number, because they are prevented by death from continuing in office. But because he lives forever, his position as Kohen does not pass on to someone else, and consequently, he is totally able to deliver those who approach God through him, since he is alive forever and thus forever able to intercede on their behalf. This is the kind of Kohen Gadol that meets our need wholly, without evil, without stain, set apart from sinners and raised higher than the heavens. One who does not have the daily necessity, like the other Kohanim Gedolim, of offering up sacrifices first for their own sins and only then for those of the people. Because he offered one sacrifice, once and for all, by offering up himself. For the Torah appoints as Kohanim Gedolim men who have weakness. But the text which speaks about the swearing of the oath, a text written later than the Torah, appoints a son who has been brought to the goal forever. 8:1 Here is the whole point of what we have been saying. We do have just such a Kohen Gadol as has been described, and he does sit at the right hand of Hadashah in heaven. There he serves in the holy place, that is, in the true tent of meeting, the one erected not by human beings but by Adonai. For every Kohen Gadol is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. So this Kohen Gadol too has to have something he can offer. Now if he were on earth, he wouldn't be a Kohen at all, since they're already a Kohanim offering the gifts required by the Torah. But what they are serving is only a copy and shadow of the heavenly original. For when Moshe was about to erect the tent, God warned him, "See to it that you make everything according to the pattern you were shown on the mountain." But now the work Yeshua has been given to do is far superior to theirs, just as the covenant he mediates is better, for this covenant has been given as Torah on the basis of better promises. Indeed, if the first covenant had not given ground for fault-finding, there would have been no need for a second one. For God does find fault with the people when he says, "See, the days are coming, says Adonai, when I will establish, over the house of Israel and over the house of Yehudah, a new covenant. It will not be like the covenant, which I made with their fathers, on the day when I took them by their hand, and led them forth out of the land of Egypt, because they, for their part, did not remain faithful to my covenant. So I, for my part, stopped concerning myself with them, says Adonai. For this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Adonai. I will put my Torah in their minds, and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. None of them will teach his fellow citizen, or his brother, saying, Know Adonai, for all will know me, from the least of them to the greatest, because I will be merciful toward their wickedness, and remember their sins no more. By using the term, new, he has made the first covenant old, and something being made old, something in the process of aging, is on its way to vanishing altogether. 9:1 Now the first covenant had both regulations for worship and a holy place here on earth. A tent was set up, the outer one, which was called the holy place. In it were the menorah, the table and the bread of the presence. Behind the second pirokot was a tent called the holiest place, which had a golden altar for burning incense and the ark of the covenant, entirely covered with gold. In the ark were the gold jar containing the manna, Aharon's rod that sprouted and the stone tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim representing the Shekinah, casting their shadow on the lid of the ark. But now is not the time to discuss these things in detail. With things so arranged, the Kohanim go into the outer tent all the time to discharge their duties, but only the Kohen Gadol enters the inner one. And he goes in only once a year, and he must always bring blood, which he offers both for himself and for the sins committed in ignorance by the people. By this arrangement, the Ruach HaKodesh showed that so long as the first tent stood standing, the way into the holiest place was still closed. This symbolizes the present age and indicates that the conscience of the person performing the service cannot be brought to the goal by the gifts and sacrifices he offers, for they involve only food and drink and various ceremonial washings regulations concerning the outward life, imposed until the time for God to reshape the whole structure. But when the Messiah appeared as Kohen Gadol of the good things that are happening already, then, through the greater and more perfect tent which is not man-made, that is, it is not of this created world, he entered the holiest place once and for all. And he entered not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus setting people free forever. For if sprinkling ceremonially unclean persons with the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer restores their outward purity, then how much more the blood of the Messiah, who, through the eternal Spirit, offered himself to God as a sacrifice without blemish, will purify our conscience from works that led to death, so that we can serve the living God. It is because of this death that he is mediator of a new covenant, or will, because a death has occurred which sets people free from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. Those who have been called may receive a promised eternal inheritance. For where there is a will, there must necessarily be produced evidence of its maker's death. Since a will goes into effect only upon death, it never has force while its maker is still alive. This is why the first covenant too was inaugurated with blood. After Moshe had proclaimed every command of the Torah to all the people, he took the blood of the calves with some water and used scarlet wool and hyssop to sprinkle both the scroll itself and all the people. And he said, "This is the blood of the covenant which God has ordained for you." Likewise, he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the things used in its ceremonies. In fact, according to the Torah, almost everything is purified with blood. Indeed, without the shedding of blood there is no forgiveness of sins. Now this is how the copies of the heavenly things are to be purified, but the heavenly things themselves require better sacrifices than these. For the Messiah has entered the holiest place which is not man-made and merely a copy of the true one, but into heaven itself, in order to appear now on our behalf in the very presence of God. Further, he did not enter heaven to offer himself over and over again, like the Kohen Gadol who enters the holiest place year after year with blood that is not his own. For then he would have had to suffer death many times from the founding of the universe on. But as it is, he has appeared once at the end of the ages in order to do away with sin through the sacrifice of himself. Just as human beings have to die once, but after this comes judgment, so also the Messiah, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to deliver those who are eagerly waiting for him. 10:1 For the Torah has in it a shadow of the good things to come, but not the actual manifestation of the originals. Therefore, it can never, by means of the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, bring to the goal those who approach the holy place to offer them. Otherwise, wouldn't the offering of those sacrifices have ceased? For if the people performing the service had been cleansed once and for all, they would no longer have sins on their conscience. No, it is quite the contrary, and these sacrifices is a reminder of sins, year after year, for it is impossible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sins. This is why, on coming into the world, he says, "It has not been your will to have an animal sacrifice and a meal offering, rather, you have prepared for me a body. No, you have not been pleased with burnt offerings and sin offerings." Then I said, "Look, in the scroll of the book, it is written about me, I have come to do your will." In saying first, you neither willed nor were pleased with animal sacrifices, meal offerings, burnt offerings and sin offerings, things which are offered in accordance with the Torah. And then, look, I have come to do your will. He takes away the first system in order to set up a second. It is in connection with this will that we have been separated for God and made holy, once and for all, through the offering of Yeshua the Messiah's body. Now every Kohen stands every day doing his service, offering over and over the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But this one, after he had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, sat down at the right hand of God, from then on to wait until his enemies be made a footstool for his feet. For by a single offering he has brought to the goal for all time those who are being set apart for God and made holy, and the Ruach HaKodesh too bears witness to us, for after saying, "This is the covenant which I will make with them after those days, says Adonai, I will put my Torah on their hearts, and write it on their minds, heathen as, and their sins and their wickednesses, I will remember no more." Now where there is forgiveness for these, an offering for sins is no longer needed. So, brothers, we have confidence to use their way into the holiest place opened by the blood of Yeshua. He inaugurated it for us as a new and living way through the Pirokot, by means of his flesh. We also have a great Cohen over God's household. Therefore, let us approach the holiest place with a sincere heart, in the full assurance that comes from trusting, with our hearts sprinkled clean from a bad conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us continue holding fast to the hope we acknowledge, without wavering, for the one who made the promise is trustworthy. And let us keep paying attention to one another, in order to spur each other on to love and good deeds, not neglecting our own congregational meetings, as some have made a practice of doing, but, rather, encouraging each other,